The most dangerous kind of revenge doesn't involve screaming, breaking things, or trying to ruin someone's life. Sometimes the absolute deadliest revenge is just a single piece of paper and dead silence. Let me explain. My name is Sloane. I'm 27 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have lived my life as an apology. I spent years working a corporate job that was slowly draining the life out of me. I swallowed insults from toxic managers, worked insane overtime, and lived inside a schedule that treated my actual life like a complete afterthought. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that burning out was just the price you pay for stability, but the stability never came, only deeper, heavier fatigue. So one Tuesday morning, without any dramatic speech or slamming doors, I just typed out a very calm 2-sentence email. My finger trembled over the mouse, and then I clicked send. I quit. 3 weeks later, I did something that absolutely terrified the practical, anxious voice in my head. I drained my entire life savings and bought my dream house to heal. Now, don't get me wrong, this wasn't some multi-million-dollar mega mansion you see splashed across social media. It was a modest, slightly weathered beach house. But to me, it was a miracle. It smelled of sea salt, ancient wood, and pure sunlight. The windows opened up to endless blue water, and instead of the screaming gridlock of city traffic, all I heard was the whispering of the waves. My first night there, I sat barefoot on my wooden deck, watching the horizon melt into this brilliant gold. For the first time in 27 years, I felt something entirely unfamiliar. Peace. Peace with zero conditions. But the universe has a funny way of testing your peace the exact moment you find it. Just as I started to believe I had finally escaped the noise of my past, my phone vibrated. My mother's name lit up the screen in the dark. Instantly, that old, familiar knot of dread twisted in my stomach. I almost let it go to voicemail, but a lifetime of conditioning and guilt is a notoriously stubborn habit. I swiped to answer. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was doing or how my new house was. Her voice carried that exact same sharp, undisputed authority it always had. That tone that just assumed my compliance before I even opened my mouth. "We're moving in tomorrow. Your dad says the drive will be fine." For a full second, my brain literally refused to process the English language. The words just floated there, heavy and completely absurd. The room suddenly felt suffocatingly small. The air got tight, as if the ocean outside had just retreated. I managed a weak, confused laugh. I honestly thought it was a terrible joke, but pure silence answered me. Then she added something colder, sharper. "If you don't like it, Sloane, you can find somewhere else to stay." The sheer audacity of that statement hit me like a physical punch to the chest. My house, my financial risk, my incredibly fragile attempt at rebuilding a life that never truly belonged to me. Yet somehow, in her mind, it was already theirs. My hands started shaking so badly, I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter. All those old emotions rushed back: anger, disbelief, and that exact sickening helplessness I felt as a child. Growing up, my parents treated my achievements like communal property. If I won a scholarship, that was a family victory. When I got my first real salary, that was family support. My boundaries were never respected. They were just treated as inconveniences. Moving away hadn't changed their expectations. It had only delayed them. I could hear my father faintly in the background, not speaking, just existing as this silent, passive reinforcement to her demands. Honestly, that hurt more than if he had just yelled at me. Everything in my body screamed to protest. I should have shouted. I should have hung up. But instead, years of forced politeness crept into my voice. I asked weak questions I already knew the answers to. How long? Why? What about my space? My mother brushed everything aside with this casual, terrifying entitlement. She was speaking about my sanctuary like she had just booked an Airbnb. When the call finally ended, the house that had felt like heaven 20 minutes earlier now felt completely invaded, contaminated by the heavy weight of their pending arrival. I paced the living room for hours. Rage and panic were literally wrestling inside my chest. Selling the house was impossible. Letting them take over was unthinkable. Every single scenario left me cornered. But then, around 3 a.m., sitting on the cold hardwood floor, the fear suddenly stopped. Beneath the panic, something else began to crystallize. A slow, steady, absolute clarity. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't trapped under their roof. I wasn't eating their food. I wasn't dependent on their approval. The ground I was standing on belonged to me. The deed had my name on it. The rules were mine. And suddenly, the trembling in my hands stopped completely. The anxiety didn't just fade, it hardened into solid steel resolve. If they wanted to claim my peace, they were going to have to confront a version of their daughter they had never, ever met. By dawn, my shock had transformed into a master plan. I replayed my mother's words in my head. "We're moving in tomorrow," over and over. But this time, I didn't hear it as a threat. I heard it as a countdown. They expected obedience. They expected accommodation. They expected the exact same Sloane who bent over backwards, who adjusted, who sacrificed her own happiness to keep the peace. They had absolutely no idea how much I had evolved. They had no idea what silence had taught me. As the morning sun flooded my living room, I stood at the window, staring at the waves. They were rolling endlessly forward, unstoppable, unapologetic. My parents believed they were driving up to occupy my home. In reality, they were walking directly into a masterclass in boundaries, 10 years in the making. I smiled, and I prepared a very special welcome package for their arrival. The morning they arrived was wrapped in that deceptive calm, the kind of calm right before a storm hits. My heart was steady. I watched through the window as their SUV rolled into my driveway with the sheer confidence of people who believed they owned the place. My mother stepped out first, scanning my property with this open, smug satisfaction. My father followed, wearing that same passive, empty expression he'd worn my entire life. Not cruel, not kind, just completely absent when it mattered most. They didn't knock. Why would they? My mother pushed the front door open and stepped inside like a marathon runner crossing a finish line. "Sloane, you really should have swept the entryway," she called out, her voice echoing off my walls. Criticism arriving before affection. Classic. I walked into the hallway and greeted them with a calm, warm smile, a smile that immediately unsettled her. She expected me to be anxious, resistant, or faking enthusiasm. She did not expect pure composure. That was the first crack in her armor. "Before you unpack anything," I said evenly, keeping my voice perfectly level, "I prepared something for you in the living room." Curiosity flickered across her face, quickly replaced with suspicion. My father shifted uncomfortably on his feet, but stayed quiet. I led them to the dining table. Sitting dead center were 3 thick, heavy binders. The sight of them alone changed the air pressure in the room. My mother's expression tightened. In our family, paperwork never meant anything pleasant unless it benefited her. "What is this?" she demanded, her tone dropping. "Receipts," I answered smoothly. "Agreements, records, everything connected to the last 10 years of my life." Her confusion gave way to irritation. She let out a dismissive laugh and waved her hand. "Oh, please, Sloane, don't start with your drama. We just drove for hours." I didn't react to the bait. I simply stepped forward, opened the first binder, and slid it directly in front of her. Inside were pages upon pages of highlighted documents. Bank transfers, loan repayments, utility bills I had paid for their house, medical expenses I had covered, insurance deductibles. I had even printed out documented text conversations, numbers, dates, hard, undeniable evidence. I watched the color physically drain from my mother's face as her arrogance was slowly replaced by comprehension. My father leaned closer, his eyes narrowing at the papers. The silence spread heavily through the room. "I tracked every single financial favor," I said, my voice completely detached and steady. "Every time I was told, family helps family. Every rent payment I covered for you. Every emergency. Every single time my own independence was delayed so that your comfort could be secured." My mother's composure completely fractured. "Are you seriously trying to bill your parents?" she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "No," I corrected her softly. "I am establishing boundaries, legally and permanently." Then I delivered the second part of the surprise. I pulled a single sheet of paper from the back of the binder and laid it on top. It was a formal document, a short-term, legally binding rental agreement, and their names were already printed at the top. My mother stared at it in sheer disbelief, battling absolute fury. "You said you were moving in," I continued, "but this is my house. Nobody lives here without my terms. If you stay as tenants. You pay market rent, temporary, conditional, and respectful." The explosion I had expected all my life finally came. My mother's voice rose, sharp and incredulous. Accusations poured out of her mouth. Selfish, ungrateful, ridiculous. It was the familiar arsenal of guilt and outrage she had used to control me since childhood. But as she yelled, something truly extraordinary happened. For the first time in my life, her words had nowhere to land. They bounced off me. She no longer controlled the narrative. She didn't control the house, she didn't control the situation, and most importantly, she didn't control me. My father, usually the king of silence, finally spoke up, his voice strained. "Sloane, this is extreme." I looked him dead in the eyes. "No," I replied quietly. "What was extreme was assuming you could take over my life whenever it suited you." The confrontation stretched painfully. Reality was pressing hard against their toxic expectations, and those expectations were finally shattering. Eventually, my mother's blinding anger gave way to something I had never seen in her before: uncertainty. She looked around my living room, not with the eyes of an owner anymore, but with the dawning recognition that she was just a guest. They had arrived believing their authority traveled with them. Instead, they walked into a fortress they could not dominate. "I love you both," I said finally, and the absolute sincerity in my voice stunned them into silence. But love without respect is just control wearing a mask, and that ends here, today. There was no more shouting, no dramatic storming out, just a heavy, deeply uncomfortable stillness. Stripped of the assumptions they had carried for decades, the balance of power had shifted so completely that it left zero room for argument. They could accept my terms, sign the paper, and pay rent, or they could leave. For the first time ever, the choice was entirely theirs, and they were entirely powerless. When they finally turned and walked back toward the front door, my mother looked smaller. My father looked older. They weren't physically defeated, but they were confronted by a concept they had never faced before: consequences. I stood on my wooden deck and watched their SUV back out of my driveway and disappear down the coastal road. The ocean roared softly behind me. It sounded exactly like quiet applause. The fear that had defined my existence for 27 years dissolved into something lighter, stronger, and permanent. Listen to me carefully. Some victories in life are loud. They are explosive, dramatic, and cinematic. But my victory? It was silent, it was precise, and it was far more devastating. Because the welcome I prepared wasn't about revenge, it wasn't about cruelty or rage, it was about independence. Documented, undeniable, and finally, mine. Remember this: the best revenge isn't destroying someone else. The best revenge is building a sanctuary so strong their toxicity isn't even allowed through the front door.